Hi, and welcome to part 3 of my intermediate PowerShell tutorial series. In the last videos, we went over some custom functions and modules, which we went over how to create a module. Today, we will be looking at PowerShell remoting, which is a very important aspect of PowerShell, especially if you're working in an IT department and taking care of multiple servers by yourself or even in a team. If you want to manage a large amount of servers, it almost becomes necessary. So we're going to be taking a look at how the remoting works, how to use it, and how we could actually make effective use of running code on a remote system. So let's first start off here by just knowing what we're going to be executing on these remote machines. I have a virtual environment set up. I'm currently using a Windows 10 machine that is configured with a domain, and I have a Active Directory domain controller and a file server as well on this on this virtual environment. If you want to know more about how to set this up, I do have some Hyper-V tutorials that I'll be linking in the description if you want to have a very similar setup. Just follow those, and that will basically get you to this type of environment, and then you can test out PowerShell remoting. Or if you have multiple computers at home and have them on a domain, or if you work in IT and have this environment already set up for you, then you could definitely test it right from there. So let's start off here. I just want to start off by just putting in host name, just so you guys can see what the name of the computer is that I'm on right now, just so you guys can see what the PowerShell remoting really does. So if I run this command, we do see that it is Win10 PC. So that's just my Windows 10 PC. And let's get ahead and let's get started here. So the first thing we're going to want to know how to do is create a script block. And what is a script block? So let's go ahead and let's take a look at that here. So we're going to assign a script block to a variable here. So let's just put that in a variable called test block. And we're going to set that to open and close curly brackets. And in here, we are going to write our script block here, which is basically just like any other script in PowerShell, but it'll be stored within a variable. So we could actually do a write host, and this is a script block. So if we set that up here and we just run this command, now if we call this variable, we will see that all we get back is write host. This is a script block. So it really doesn't do what we want it to do, which is actually just display this is a script block. So to actually execute the script block itself is all you have to do is add an ampersand symbol in front of the variable. And then if we execute that, we see that we get this is a script block. So that's perfect. We know what a script block is, and we know that we can execute script blocks within PowerShell. Now, what we want to do is we want to be able to take these script blocks and execute them on remote machines. Now, we know that my machine right now is named Win10 PC. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to call the invoke commandlet, and then we're going to put a computer name in here. And we are going to put my DC computer name, which is going to be RTS 2019. And we are going to give it we're actually going to give it a file path. And then I'm going to show you how to do a script block as well. So we have this file path here that we can specify to a local script on your computer. So I actually have a local script here in my C drive called get hostname, which if we just run this, if we just like open it up in Notepad, all it is, it just gets the host name of the machine. So let's go ahead and let's run that here. And if we run that, we actually takes a little bit of time, but we do get back RTS 2019, which is the name of the server that I'm executing this command on. So what we could actually do is invoke command, computer name, RTS 2019, and then if we do a script block, as we know, a script block needs to be within curly brackets. And let's do a write host. This is running on, and then we're going to put a variable here, and we're just going to put host name. And then what we're going to do as well, just so you guys can see the difference. So we're going to run this line number 9, which is just a write host. This is running on a host name. We see that this is running on Win 10 PC. And then if we do the invoke command on RTS 2019 with the same script block, we get this is running on RTS 2019. So we know that we are running these commands on that computer. Now, when it comes down to running just an invoke command, this is going to be okay if you're running 1 or 2 commands at most. But if you need something a little bit more persistent, like if you're planning on creating some variables, um, it doesn't really work too well. And also what we just did here, we could set up, we can use variables, but we haven't passed in any variables. So we're going to be taking a look at those 2 things now. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some variable here, and we are going to assign this to the value of this is a local variable. And now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to invoke the command on RTS 2019, and we're going to do the this is running. We're just going to do this just so you guys can see it better. And we are going to do write host. This is running on, and what we're going to do is we're going to pass in some variable. Now, in theory, what we might think is this is going to say this is running on RTS 2019, and this is a local variable. But when we actually execute this, we are going to see that all we get back is this is running on RTS 2019, and then it goes blank. The variable did not get passed. Now, this is actually normal. There's a few ways that we could pass in local variables into the remote computer. So let's take a look at the 2 methods here. The first one is going to be an argument list. So if we do here, we add another parameter, we get a argument list here, and then we're going to pass in our sum variable. And then instead of referencing some variable here, we are going to reference the args and open and close bracket, and we're going to pass in 0 here. And then if we run this, we actually see that we get this is running on RTS 2019, and this is a local variable. So that's one way. And you could always have, you can pass as many variables as you want into this argument list via a comma separated list. And then you would just increase this index counter to 1, 2, 3, 4, as you see fit, depending on how many variables you're passing through. Now, the easier one, I find it easier anyways, is if you actually just run the same command as we did before, no extra parameters, but instead of referencing the $ some variable, we are going to do $ using colon some variable. Now, if we run this here, we actually see that we get the same result as the argument list, but I find this is a little bit of an easier syntax to remember, and we get this is running on RTS 2019, and this is a local variable. So that tells us that we can pass in local variables, but we're still missing one thing, and that is if we did this here, so if we did $test equals this, And then we went ahead and invoked another command where we just wanted to write host, and we had test here. So what we're going to do is we're going to do that, and then let's go ahead and let's write host test. So if we run this here, so this is setting the variable and then writing it. So we'll see that it works great. Give me 1 second here. I need to make this a string. So if we run this here, now we should get no errors. So we do get this is running on RTS 2019, and this is a local variable. But now watch what happens if I try to write the $test again in a separate invoke command. We get nothing. And this is because this invoke command will bring up a session on the remote computer, execute the code within the script block, and then closes the session. So any variables are lost, and any type of data from that session is lost. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create these what's called a persistent session. And then we can execute tons of invoke commands using the sessions, and the sessions are able to keep track of these variables. So let's take a look at how we do that here. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to do a new dash PS session, and we can pass in the computer name, RTS 2019. And then we see here, as a result, we get back ID 9. We get the name, we get a computer name, which is our RTS 2019, our computer type, which is a remote machine, and we see that it is opened. So what we could actually do as well is we can open up a new PS session to my other server here. So let's do computer name, RTFS 2019. All right. And now let's see all the sessions that we have open. So we can do a get PS session here. And now we can see that we have our two sessions, our RTS 2019 and RTFS 2019, and we see that they're both opened. So what we're going to do is we can pass in a computer name or an instance ID. I like to use computer name here. And then we can set this session to a variable called session here. So now if we look at what is inside of this session, we see that it is our session ID 9, RTS 2019. So what we can do here is actually invoke command, and then we have our session, and then we pass in our session variable, and we can run a script block here. Now what we're going to do is we're just going to set up this right here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do invoke command session on the same session here. And we're going to do another script block. And we are going to do the write host test. So let's invoke this first command here. We should get nothing back because we're just assigning a variable. And now let's go ahead and let's invoke this command. Let's just write out the variable here. And we do see that it works now. Whereas in this other test here, if we take out this, if we have the two invoke commands here, we will see that this will not give any output, whereas this does because it's using sessions. Again, that's just because by doing an invoke command, you're opening the session, running the code, and then closing off the session, whereas this one, we have the persistent session that we open, we're using that session, but now that we're done, we need to close or disconnect the session. So you can disconnect a session and then you can also remove it. So what happens with that is, let's say you're running all this code and then you go ahead and you close out of PowerShell and you reopen it, your session will still be there, but in a disconnected state. So what that kind of looks like is if we do a disconnect PS session here and we do a session ID and we pass in my session variable. Now you're going to see if we do a get PS session here, we see that the RTS is disconnected and the RTFS 2019 is open. So if we try to execute code on this RTS 2019, we're going to get an error till we reconnect. And that's as easy as doing a connect PS session, and then session variable here. And then we are now reopened. If we do the get PS session, we do see that they are opened. Now, what I would typically recommend is just to always make sure that you're running very cleanly, is at the end of your code is to just do a get PS session, pipe that to disconnect PS session, and then pipe that to what's called a remove PS session, and that will go ahead, and if we run that, then we get PS session, we have no more persistent sessions left over. So there's no more connections. All those are closed and cleaned out of PowerShell. So if you close your PowerShell window and reopen it, you're going to have to reset up those sessions, but that's okay because that's really what PowerShell remoting is all about. It's just about connecting to the computer for the time that you really need. You don't want to leave sessions open when you don't need to. You want to connect to the remote machine, execute your code, execute the commands that you need to execute on them, and then disconnect and then remove the session. And this way you're all good. And that's really PowerShell remoting in, I like to call it the simplified version. It's definitely quite something that takes quite a bit of time to get used to, but definitely is quite useful if you're managing, like I said, as soon as you're managing 2 servers or more, you're definitely going to want to use PowerShell remoting instead of having to log in to the server, open up a PowerShell window on that server and execute the code. It just sounds like a lot of work that you don't want to do if you don't have to. Because if you're looking at teams like the Netflix or Google or Amazon, when you have tons of servers to manage, you don't want to be logging into hundreds of them. You only want to be doing it one time. In my next video, we're going to be going over Pester, and that's the unit tests on PowerShell. And then after that, we're going to be taking a look at importing data files. So we're going to be looking at importing CSV data. I might do JSON and XML data files if I see that there's a lot of people that want that. Might even do some 3 separate videos, one for CSV, one for JSON, and one for XML. Just this way, you only have to watch the video for the data file you're actually interested in, since they are very different in each way, but they are very useful. And then after that, we're going to be starting to really automate Active Directory in some deeper PowerShell tutorials on projects. So I will see you on the next video. Please like and subscribe.